we'll make a start. He's good, Genevieve and Grant. So welcome this morning. Oh, sorry. Are we on, Katie? Good. Thank you. And I know we've got a few councillors online, so thank you. And also Jolie, welcome along. It's great to have you here. People don't remember Jolie's on our Strategy and Policy Committee, youth representative. And yeah, we'll make a start. So I've got Daphlin and Marie and the team. So haramai, ki te tepu, and we'll make a start. So thanks team. And I know we've got 3 different strategies to get through in 2 different sessions. So the Na'awa Pākahi strategy, Braid River Revival strategy, and then the land strategy, and then another session on the gravel management strategy. So hand over to you, Marie. Take it away. Kia ora.
O tēnā koutou katoa. This is Sarah Worthington, who is a principal advisor. Oh, sorry.
Take that down a bit.
Mō taku he. Just like to introduce Sarah Worthington, who you've met before, who's a principal advisor in the Rivers team. Right. So the purpose of today's briefings is to update you on the 3 strategies up there, on the progress that we've been making. The first 30 minutes is going to are the briefing highlights of the high-level relationships amongst those strategies, and then we're going to turn to whakahaumanu ngā awa Pākahi and the land strategy in more detail, and then the following briefing at 10:45, as the chair just mentioned, will be focused on the details of engagement and proposed next steps for the regional river gravel management strategy. I'm just going to go through a couple of slides that are for context that you've seen before, just to remind you about how these 3 strategies fit together. So there's the whakahaumanu ngā awa Pākahi, and then the land strategy, and then the gravel management strategy. This just highlights the relationships amongst these pieces of work and the complex and changing context in which they sit. The timeline here is just a reminder of the fact that these conversations have been going on for a long time, and they've been live for several years. We brought the draft strategy to you in March. You provided us with some feedback and you asked us to take it to Te Ruputuia, who in turn asked us to engage with Papati Pūrunanga. That engagement occurred over April and May, and here we are today bringing you back an overview of that. This slide just reiterates that this transformational approach to our work in rivers is already occurring. Right, so we've grouped and summarised the feedback into key points or themes on the following 2 slides. The runanga feedback and the feedback that we received from you in March really helped us reflect on the challenges in developing a regional strategy that will be applied at place in different communities. That was probably the fundamental thing that came from the feedback. And one of the key points raised was the level of detail appropriate for a regional strategy intended to be high level and enduring over time. The runanga feedback, so we've sort of summarised and grouped these into themes. The first one of those, the delivery of Braid River Revival, can't be achieved without considering a wider scope. The point is about the scope, that more than the actions in the strategy are required to revive rivers. That is agreed. This strategy is about Environment Canterbury's work, and it is only part of what's required to revive rivers. But I guess given the scale and the impact of our work in rivers, it's important that we articulate and commit to that. To our piece of what that Landscape Scale Alliance requires to make that change. We propose to make that clearer. We think that we can add some text in that without labouring the point too much. That will make that clearer. The flood hazard focus The need for this strategy was partially to address the integration of different Environment Canterbury roles and responsibilities in rivers and highlight the changing historic flood hazard management methods. Hazard management is one of our three core services, and a significant proportion of the physical work that we undertake in and with rivers, as identified by the three outcomes, it isn't intended to be the sole focus. And again, we propose to make this clearer by adding some text. The use of kutakutai and modi, there was a range of feedback on the use of these concepts. In response, staff are proposing that we remove those explicit definitions, but keep the terms in the document, so still use the words modi and kutakutai, but by removing the definitions but keeping the words in there, mana whenua can then define those concepts in place as they see fit. So, for example, aro whenua would apply those concepts of modi to the rakatata, whether that was to restore, revive, and say how they think the modi is being affected or changing by actions. The issue of elevating the strategy and illustrating the integration, the feedback was directed at the we will, the kind of action elements of the strategy, querying, amongst other things, whether they were the most important actions and where they were relevant. Again, so to address that, we are proposing to take out the we will actions and develop a separate implementation plan. That is a change that you will want to consider, but this is an enduring 100-year strategy, and if it's elevated to a principles outcome focus level, then the detail and nuance can be contained in place-based strategies and implementation plans, and that enables the new draft to better address both councillors seeking a greater level of detail and the runanga feedback that these things are best considered at a place-based level within takiwā. And then there would still be, or there would probably be more opportunity for council to have input into those implementation plans and processes through the LTP cycle. And Sarah may speak to that a bit more. Right.
Tēnā koutou katoa. So following on from Marie, this next slide is a very high-level summary of the feedback we received from you in March. So again, it's just grouped into themes. Everything isn't there, but we've tried to group it as best we can. So firstly, we heard a number of requests for specific acknowledgement and action for flood risk management in semi-urban areas that came out in quite a few pieces of feedback. We heard that the strategy could include stronger references to specific issues and challenges across the region, including this specific point. That includes the challenges related to semi-urban areas, but also just generally what challenges our rivers are facing, like encroachment. That also came out strong in the runanga feedback. So we propose to add and refine the descriptions and context in the strategy to clearly articulate those challenges, so you'll see more words up front on what challenges our rivers are facing, and it'll set a bit more context on why this strategy exists and what it's trying to achieve. Secondly, we heard that you would like to incorporate reference to existing policy and planning documents, and also that we should consider how to include future changes to national direction. The strategy is drafted to give direction for achieving long-term outcomes and objectives in a way that is enduring and can adapt to changes in legislation and funding over time. It's drafted so that it can do that without needing to be continually adjusted or us needing to review the strategy each time a change is made. This was also considered as part of our recommendation to lift the strategy up and develop a separate implementation plan aligned with the long-term plan cycle. It will ensure that the policy and planning requirements can be considered at the time we're considering those actions, and we can adjust to any changes that come through as they come. It will avoid the strategy becoming quickly out of date, and as Marie said, the strategy provides a long-term 100-year framework and is intended to guide our work at a high level, where an implementation plan can get more into the detail and consider the short and medium-term actions and how they fit within the legislative framework that we're dealing with at the time. Changes requested regarding naming, we've just referred directly to the Environment Canterbury writing guide for that. So we have and will review the strategy as a whole to make sure that the language we're using is consistent both throughout the strategy and with the writing guide. Lastly, we received quite a lot of feedback regarding the map's definition of braided rivers and descriptions, and some reference to the significant rivers that we had in the existing draft. We received similar feedback from our Runanga engagement. Very similar points were raised. What we're proposing to do is include a high-level definition of braided rivers. So what are they? Actually getting that down in writing. We are proposing to change the map to better reflect the region's rivers as a whole, not just the specific ones we have in the current draft, and we will be removing the reference to significant rivers so that it's not implying that we consider any one river to be held above all of the rest. So this slide is just intended to give you a really high-level visibility of where we propose to make the changes so you can have an idea of what the new draft will look like. Overall, considering everything we've spoken to you about, the feedback has generally shown that there's more work to do to clarify the scope and better articulate the background, including why braided rivers are important, what challenges they face, and why this strategy exists. This is going to involve further work to move text and sections around, clarify the scope, and highlight the key messages. The document's going to look quite different for that reason as we reshuffle things. However, the key messages, outcomes, objectives, and principles will remain unchanged. The most substantial change being proposed is the removal of the we wills that Marie and I have both mentioned, and the development of a separate implementation plan aligned with the long-term plan cycle. Again, this is just to articulate the short and medium-term actions and keep the 100-year strategy high level and enduring, and prevent us having to constantly update it. And that's going to be particularly helpful in the face of the legislative reform that we're working through. I'll just go through this slide really quickly. This is at a very high level what it looks like when you remove those we wills from the strategy. We did receive some comments, particularly through the Runanga engagement, that the design of the previous draft, where we had objectives beneath each outcome, wasn't illustrating an integrated strategy. It was kind of grouping the objectives under each individual outcome, which was contrary to what we were trying to say, that these are integrated and we need to be considering all three outcomes in our work. So displaying those objectives alongside all three outcomes is one way that we could illustrate that these are all intended to be integrated. We also note that the strategy principles, which are not shown on this page, will remain, and those are what we intend to guide our work. This is the what, and those are the how we will go about it.
So after this briefing, and I note that we've still got 15 minutes left, so there'll some time for some comments through you, Chair. Yes, and then there's just a couple more slides about the progress on the land strategy. So we're proposing to make changes to incorporate both your and the Runanga feedback, and then bring the amended strategy, back to you on the 30th of July Council meeting for adoption.
Thanks, Marie. Any quick feedback? But I know I would be keen to spend a little bit of time on the land strategy stuff. So I know we've been over this a few times, and staff have explained the changes in relation to our feedback and the Runanga feedback. Grant?
Yes, thanks for updating your process to deliver the revised plan, because I definitely had some concerns about some of the things that you're now going to address, because it does have to be holistic and integrated. And we're going to talk shortly about the land strategy. I'm still not sure about how wise it is to remove the reference to whole of river, even though there might be some sort of issue there with Q to Kitai. The whole of river concept is incorporated into our 30-year infrastructure strategy. So it is a cross strategy document, and also the relationship with our RPS.
I didn't pick up that the whole of river stuff's going to be removed. To be honest, but
I
Sarah
can clarify that. So that particular reference was feedback we received that the way the strategy is drafted currently was putting whole of river and Kiu to Kitai together and implying that they're the same thing. That was never intended. We're not seeking to diminish what Kiu to Kitai means by saying that it is whole of river, but both of those terms we propose to remain because they both have meaning. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. I thought you were going to take them out in terms of definition, but are you leaving them in and just clarifying them a bit more?
Yeah, they're different.
Okay, that's fine.
The main thing.
Yeah, look, I think you're heading in the right direction, a broader strategy. In terms of the relationship with the land strategy, it is, in my mind, the context issue of the whole of river, and not just including Environment Canterbury owned land, but the land that follows our river. To my mind, it's a catchment type approach, and I'm thinking of the spatial planning stuff that's likely to come through changes to the RMA, and that you are looking at the context of our rivers related to the land either side of our rivers. And to my mind, that's how the river revival stuff, in a true sense, from mountains to the sea, can be worked on. But hopefully when you're re-looking at those broader things, outstanding natural landscape components as well, where our rivers form part of that. That's probably my main higher order stuff, really. It's just ensuring that whole bigger picture stuff is taken into account. But I like the idea of a separate implementation strategy, so that doesn't get tied up with the detail part, doesn't get tied up with the broader strategy.
Cool. Thanks, Grant. Dion?
Just one question around the separation of the Tiu to Kitai. Is there a possibility that for the people who will be who will be using the strategy, somebody who wants to do some work or anything, that there's a potential for a misalignment in terms of who thinks what? Like, somebody may think, oh, this is what I'm able to do, somebody who's doing the work, and then it's got a different definition an interpretation is the word I was looking for. Do you think there's a risk of different interpretations if you don't have the definitions quite aligned, especially for people that will be doing work in those rivers?
I think that's a good question. I think all of this work is going to be at place. I mean, that's so we have quite a few ways that we currently work with Runanga about what our intentions and our work programs are in building their aspirations into those. And I think that's probably will help facilitate those conversations. I think we have them now. It may push us into having them more regularly, or that may be one of the points of discussion.
I get what you're saying. I feel that there is a potential for a conflict with contractors versus somebody else thinking something different when it actually comes to implementing and doing things on the ground.
Yeah, but there's no rules in here, Dion.
I know, but it's
details of contracts and consents and actual work undertaken is, I think, a bit different than this high level stuff that's trying to get us people on similar pages, I think. But yeah, I don't know.
There's a risk of misinterpretation, I feel.
Hopefully they're going to be defined so that it just says that they're different, and anyway, we'll see when we see the words, that'll help us as well. David?
Thanks. We're undergoing quite a bit of work in the RMA field. Are there any sort of potential requirements for change dependent on how the RMA outcomes land? I was sort of looking at, I won't go into specifics, but generally, does the pending RMA reforms have any effect on wording or phraseology in the Braided River strategy?
Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything in the current draft that would have to change based on the direction that we're currently seeing in the reforms. Given that the strategy is at a very high level in directing where we want to go over the next 100 years and how we're going to go about our work, the resource management legislative piece can be kept quite separately and considered through the implementation plan. But I don't think there's anything at the high-level strategy that would need to change.
Question, though, David. Thanks, Sarah. Claire?
Yeah, look, I just want to go back to the line of questioning from Councillor Swiggs, because I think it's quite important to get that clarity around Kia ora katoa. This organisation, and I've been here for nearly 9 years now, it's actually been a word or a concept that we actually use very frequently. And if we have misappropriated it or misusing it, then I think that's really important that we actually understand what's going on here. So I'm not sure whether you are the appropriate people to answer that question, but what's the sticking point? What's the issue that we sort of have to talk? Because it feels like it's becoming a them and us almost. I just want to dig into it a bit, understand it a bit.
From what I've read is I think the Runanga might have said that whole of river doesn't define what kitikitai is, so they shouldn't be used interchangeably, potentially. So they're looking to say, well, this is what kitikitai means from the phraseology that the Runanga has put to it over the years, versus whole of river is like a summary of what it means, but it's not all of what it means. So that's what I have picked up. I haven't read the feedback, obviously, but that's what I'm picking up from what I've heard from staff today. Is that about right? And they just want that said.
Yeah, that is one of the issues. The other is that once you start to write down exactly what kitikitai means, I think the general parameters of what we understand kitikitai to mean are reasonably well understood, and but when you start to write down and start to put things in and leave things out, that's the bit where we get to different people have different perspectives on that, and those are probably the things. It's probably those pieces that are best decided at place by those Runanga. But I think you can feel reasonably confident that the general way that we've described that in our documents has got the right intent.
Thank you. I reckon we should move on to the land strategy stuff, because I really do want to spend a little bit of time on that, and we've only got 4 minutes left now. And we potentially, I think we need a bit more time on this, but where you go, and we'll see how far we get.
So this is again just a timeline showing that the work that's been done on this to date, and oops, wrong direction. And here we are at where the green arrow sits. Just a point of clarification: this land strategy development does exclude any commercial urban land, such as this building we're in and the building next door. I know that that's been a question raised before. So just to clarify that this is talking about the land that we administer and own. That's most of it is adjacent to rivers and associated with rivers. The current focus of where we are now is Papa Te Purunanga engagement on the content and intent of the land strategy. We had one hui about a month or so ago and got 2 more scheduled for next week. I think I'll probably just keep going and you can see that the next steps that we've got proposed are here. I do want to just reiterate that while we don't actually have a draft strategy for you, there is a lot of progress being made based on the work that we've been doing in day-to-day work programs, and that are contributing to implementation and things that we're doing now. So the process of the strategy development, including the workshops and the briefings that we've had with you, have provided quite a bit of direction and guidance, and the staff that are engaged with the day-to-day responsibilities for flood and river resilience, leases, licences, regional parks, forestry and ecological values, this work, knowing that there's a strategy coming and having these conversations and pointing things out and looking at what we're doing, has actually led to much more aligned and improved work programs. It has identified the need for policy development, such as a land acquisition and disposal policy, or would like to think of a better name of it than that, but that's the intent. The data collection and verification on land ownership clarity and the underlying legislation and any conditions. For example, the proceeds from land sales that we administer. There is the legislation that under which we hold this land there's a lot of it. It's varied. Some of it's very old because we've inherited a lot of it from the catchment board, and it does impose restrictions on what we can and can't do. So there's a lot of work going on to understand all of those various, once the issue's highlighted, people within their current work programs can start to look at what impact those things will have. And we've also got really good examples of improved business practices, particularly in forestry. There's been a lot of work going on in our forestry work, both on our commercial forestry and its interactions with our flood management forestry. And we have got a reasonable draft of a forestry implementation plan, again, based on some of the guidance that you've given us in some of those briefings. And that's got some prioritised work and ballpark budgets. Those are the kind of things that we are going to put into, in the same way we've talked about in the whakahaumanu, that we would put into implementation plans, and they would come through the LTP cycle for funding once we prioritise them, and you will have the opportunity to look at those. The Papa Te Purunanga engagement, as I said, is underway. And so the next slide just highlights what the plan that we're intending, the obviously very loose timeframes, because I feel like we've given you timeframes before that haven't been met, so we're trying to be more realistic about them. Right, I'll stop there so there's time for questions or comments.
Thanks, Marie. I know I've got a couple. Just first of all, when it comes to the Strategy and Policy Committee, has that happened? It hasn't happened, eh?
Not a draft, no.
No. When's that likely?
We are prioritising finishing the Braided River Revival and the Gravel Management Strategy there's a bit of staff, common staff in those. We are prioritising those two for this triennium. So it's possible that we could bring that draft to you in this triennium, but I don't think there'll be time for you to make and to adopt it.
Cool. I mean, I think that would be important to get to maybe a draft August or September. I mean, noting that July is the other one, and maybe June is gravel. I think. I think that would be good because I think that's been the sort of missing piece to date is it's actually having a document to look at. We've done a lot of talking and there's been a lot of guidance and feedback, and it's just, but until you see it, but like the Braid River one and the gravel one, until you see it in a form, that's hard to sort of comprehend it. So I think that would be really useful. Vicky, you've got a question.
Yeah, so firstly, just to talk on what Councillor Chair Pauling's just said, and particularly because this council has been here for 3 years, so it would be good, I think, for us to be able to share our insights before who knows who's sitting around the table come October. In terms of it would be really helpful to see mapping of where our land is. I mean, obviously there will be maps and defining, but I'm wondering, have we looked at, because in the past we talked about like where Lynn's land is, Dock land, our land, is this going to sort of show where there's potential for sort of teaming up with some of the other agencies where there's public land in a bigger collection, and how it can then go towards the Braided River revival aspects, because this is where the opportunity seems to me to lie. And will it then also play into, are we going to look where we've got at the moment those in, so tying in back to the Braided River Revival, there's the Braided River Revival strategies, and we've got the 2 rivers there already, but are we going to be, will the land strategy help to identify some sort of prioritisation or list that demonstrates opportunities in the other areas and tying in with our land strategy? That's what I'm sort of expecting to see, but is that what you're anticipating this is going to show us?
You can, so yes, in part. Our land is actually on Canterbury Maps. You can look up, if you're interested, you can actually look up Canterbury Maps and find our land holdings. So you don't even need to use eCan maps. Will it show other agencies' lands in our maps? I hadn't envisaged that, but potentially it could, although, but that is definitely part of the thinking. I think we've talked before about the fact that particularly if we were looking at land acquisition for any reason, that one of the first places we would go would be other agencies, particularly Dock and Lynn's, because they have land that is adjacent to ours. So yes, I hadn't envisaged actually putting it on the map, but we could.
I think it would be really helpful. So I've looked in Canterbury Maps and I can see our land, and I know that we've got quite a predominance along the Waimakariri, for example. But I can't see, Lynn's shows land parcels, but it's not showing me their land ownership and in the way it is. So I think it would be really helpful to understand how the different agencies tie, how much of the waterway edges get tied up with all of that, and that helps then, if we're teaming up and working collaboratively, even if we haven't quite got the relationships there yet, that's what I think we should be working towards, and that's where the big opportunity is when we all work together with the opportunity of public land adjacent to these rivers and help to really flesh out where the Braided River Revival can go to get where it needs to be in our aspirations for 100 years.
Agreed. And if I could just remind you of the work that we did in the Rakatata with the brag work, that did very much work with Lynn's and Dock, looking at the range of land in that. Yeah, thanks.
Joe, and then I'll come to you, Grant.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of get Vicky's point, but I also think it is our kind of land strategy, so definite focus should be on our land. I just kind of on the last point, I think that it should be the Canterbury Regional Council land strategy, because our land deeds and legal titles are held under that name. So, and also it'd be good to, early in the piece, for it to kind of push the stewardship and the fact that it is the public ownership kind of context, just because, it's not our land, it is kind of the people of Canterbury's land.
Thanks, Joe. And I mean, I think the point that Vicky's made, and I think we've made it numerous times, I note that in the Brad River Revival outcome, especially the last one on that slide, partnerships and collaborations align funding opportunities to enable action. I think that's the bit, and I think what Vicky's trying to say is how do these two link together, and that's probably a really key part of that sort of even analysis of what's possible with others. And I know that will happen at place and through implementation, but I suppose we just want something in there that points to that and says this is a work program or this is a potential work program that could be explored at place when that looks likely, especially around regional potential future regional parks or whatever. Like that's just something like that, because there's already discussions about the Kōwhai River, etc., and we know there's other land holdings that we could link to. So it's just that sort of stuff. And my other question is the policy that you mentioned, Marie, around land acquisition and disposal. Is that been drafted, or because you said this come up as a need? So is there a plan of action around how that might get done? Or
Not currently.
not currently? Okay.
No, but what I was trying to point out is that as part of this process, we've stacked up quite a to-do list,
Yeah, cool.
and that's definitely one of them.
No, thank you. Grant? Yeah. Oh,
Just to be a pedantic prick, Joe, quite a lot of the land isn't for the whole of the Canterbury community. It's specifically for those rivers that it's attached to, and so there are communities of interest. But apart from that, your idea is right.
Grant?
Yeah, look, I think I agree with Craig was saying before. I still feel very uneasy about the situation in terms of us being able to see your revised draft of especially the River Revival project, because just going from what you're doing now without us seeing it and then suddenly seeing it at a decision-making meeting, I feel uncomfortable about that, given the fact that the scope of changes that you're required to deliver. We need to see a draft and be able to comment on that, make any final adjustments before it goes to council, in my view. In terms of the land strategy, I'm in the same. I feel, we may have had some workshops or whatever on, but I'm still in the dark about what that's actually all about. And that is really where is our land? And in terms of a strategy, how our land, in terms of a whole of river approach, and I'll go use those words again, the whole of the river, the context of it, our land, other public land and private land, where are the gaps, what are the opportunities, is a strategic document. That's I'm kind of a bit worried that there's two things that you've got in that very first page that you gave us on the Braid River Revival. You talked about achieved with considering wider scope, and you talked about landscape scale alliance required, and that's vital. But then in another situation, you're talking about strategy at place, and I don't really understand what you mean by strategy at place. That sounds like site design, site-specific little projects outside of strategy. So is the strategy the landscape scale alliance type strategy, or is it a strategy about implementation?
I think, Grant, what is being referred to is there is plans for each river, and the Rakitata is the one that's been worked on. There was the Rakahuri as well, I understood, that had some work underway. So there is, underneath this wider braided river strategy, there is catchment-specific ones. So it's another work program that's going on. So there is still that work being undertaken. I mean, this high-level strategy is to try to get that locked in so that other catchment work can happen. But until you've got this, it's like chicken and egg. You can't.
I mean, I suppose what in order for a strategic approach, you can do a conceptual kind of diagram where you're not being specific, but you're saying, that one that we had previously on Braided River Revival, a river, and the key component parts of that. So that, and having that as an upfront saying, this is the strategy of connections between different things, as a vision. So the vision is a broader scale thing. But anyway, look, you'll have to consider that. But I just feel a bit slightly in the dark.
Thanks, Grant. Genevieve?
Yeah, thanks for that. Actually, between Vicky and Grant, I'm along the same lines as them, actually. With regards to Vicky, I think we do need to actually have a strategy that involves land in similar areas with maybe common good, but also identify the land that is currently occupied or used for other reasons that could be a potential acquisition for our land portfolio, even if it includes not purchasing it but using it as a consent to occupy for various reasons. And I do think we need to look at also that leasing land for the common good, flood mitigation, like we do in some parts of the Waimeka area. I know that we do that. So I'm hoping that this document or strategy will include future acquisition of land for that. So I think the mapping situation is really pivotal in that. And also, I'm looking forward to seeing something with a little bit more detail too, along the lines of what Grant was talking about, because without everything together, you can't really sort of determine what the outcome's going to look like. And so, thank you, though.
I think that that finer work, I think that's probably what the strategy needs to point to in terms of work programs, and then that could be funded through our annual plans, long-term plans. I think that's why we need to get the strategy sorted and done, so that then it can lead to that good work that I think we all want to see. But I think that the strategy should point to that. It should highlight that as a potential area of work, so at least it's discussed and not, because if it's not there, I think you're going to get this feedback. So I think I had Claire, did you have your hand up earlier on? Yeah, and then I've got Dion and John.
I just want to thank staff for where we've got to on the Braided River, and obviously some heap of work to still be done on the land strategy. So you go forward with my support around that. I think it needs to be pretty high level. I don't like the idea of pulling in or going wider than Environment Canterbury owned and controlled or authorised, where we have authorisations over our land. As for the last suggestion around having designations in a public document, that's very dangerous space to be going in. I don't think we should even think about going there. So, look, I just want you to carry on and be high and strategic. And I acknowledge Chair Pauling's comment around the fact that we've got Braided River projects, and I'm really concerned about the Ashley that's sort of been stalled for jolly near 3 years, as far as I'm aware. We've done our side of it, but no progress going forward. So, keep it high.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, and I reiterate Councillor Mackay's thoughts. I had a conversation with the Deputy Commissioner of Crown Lands on Monday, and I've actually come away a wee bit confused as to what we do own and what we manage on behalf of, and what we can actually achieve. So not necessarily an answer today, but when we talk about maybe putting in regional parks and a bunch of things, are we limited to the land that we own, or is that land still vested in LINZ and we are just managing? So it's just a question in my mind of where the legality of ownership and things sit. We talk about what we do, but I just came away a wee bit confused about the responsibility of LINZ and the ownership of the beds and water and navigable rivers and the like. So just a wee bit on that would be helpful for me in time, so no rush today.
Thanks, John. Dion?
Very briefly, I'm pretty comfortable with the braided river strategy as a whole. I think that's fine. And the land strategy, just one. Are we going to have a definition of what strategic asset will look like in the land strategy?
Are you talking about the land that we? Oh, I'm sorry. Could you elaborate?
So what I mean is that some of the land that we own is we have to own it for a strategic reason, flood protection most likely, or something like that. Some land might not be necessarily strategic, but we own it because it's overhang from maybe it was once upon a time strategic. So having a clear definition of what is strategic, because what I want to do is make sure that there's better protection for what is strategic.
I'm not sure that we would use the term strategic, but we could tease out. I think I understand what you're meaning, and we could definitely tease out where it's required, what purpose we have it for, and where it's still required for that purpose, and where there may be an opportunity to look at options. So
the only reason I ask that is, and it kind of ties into what Genevieve was saying, is that if we do define what's strategic, there might be other areas that we may need to look at in the future that we don't necessarily own or something like that. I don't know if this is where it fits, but it's thinking about it from a higher level.
Thanks, Dion. Good point. Joe, and then Peter, and Ian. You good, Peter?
Yeah, I just welcome a strategic approach to our land. I mean, if you look at the issues that are caused within the Rangitata when we were looking at what we were going to do and the ownership problems that we have between the two bridges, between Linz, ourselves, and DOC and private landholders, it's almost when those people that occupy those lands almost like they're being attacked if there's no strategy that they can actually look at to identify the intent that the regional council has. So I'm hearing more operational, tactical stuff coming from others, but I think we need this high-level document so people at least get a look at what we're thinking about, and so I welcome it. So well done.
Ian?
Yeah, and I'll try to be brief, but I just wanted to go back to Joe's comments because I think he's quite right that a lot of the land we have is endowed for a specific purpose, and the income from that purpose is endowed to a specific part of the community, and so clearly the land management strategy needs to talk to those communities of interest and in terms of what they want, what they aspire to from that, and a case in point was when we talked to the city council last about potential solar farms out on the land on the Waimak, and that would have made the Waimak flood protection scheme cost neutral to the most of the ratepayers sit within the Christchurch city area and then up in the Waimak. You know, that's the sort of discussion we need to have so that they understand what it is we're trying to achieve and whether they support that or whether they support the other values. And to that end, I support the fact that this needs to be done with that right level of consultation, and I don't see any urgency to have it done within this triennium.
Yeah, I just think it would be good to get a draft to us so that we can have a look at it. I mean, we're definitely not going to sign anything off. I don't think there's time for that. But it would be good to get it sort of brought together in a comprehensive way so that we can have a better idea, because at the moment it's pretty conceptual. But it would be good to see the sort of structure and what it could look like. And, yeah, then the next council will be the ones to finalise it with staff. So, Nick? Last one.
Yeah, I'll keep it very brief because most of the things have been covered off. But I welcome a high level strategic approach to this land owning, and I have concerns with some of the issues that were raised by other councils and their ideals going forward. And I support Claire and John and their approach around the whole land management strategy.
Thanks, Nick. Hey, thanks, Sarah and Murray. I think that land strategy is the one that's got a lot of interest. So, like I said, I think that's the one we probably need to do a little bit more work on. But no, you've got the other ones to get out of the way first, but that'd be important. So thank you. And Lee, sorry we've gone over time, but I've heard from Tim that we can push into the next one a little bit. So we'll do our best. So I'll hand over to you, Lee, and to introduce the team. I know there's someone online as well to introduce, so thank you.
Morena koutou. Hopefully we can catch you up a bit of time here. You have met Jolene before. She's holding the pen, one of our river planners for the gravel management strategy, and online we have Laura, who's been offering a little bit of external legal advice to make sure this is all good to go to council in July. So we have talked to you about this several times, and this is a briefing ahead of sending you the document for final feedback before we do move to July. You have seen this timeline before. This project, coincidentally, was scheduled to kick off 1 month after we had the biggest flood event in Canterbury in 3 decades. So we have been chipping away at it, but it has taken a wee while, but we're almost there. So since we last talked to you in December, you have had the draft of this document several times, but we will send you an updated one today. We did do some external feedback, and 8 people chose to come and speak to you about their comments in May, and now we're here with our current plan to bring the final document to you at your July council meeting. And Joe's going to cover some matters that were primarily raised through the feedback and in the draft with you.
Kia ora koutou. I'm now going to cover some information on the engagement and decision-making process, an overview of the GMS content, and 2 slides summary, the key feedback that we have received and what changes we're recommending to address those. Councils are not required to prepare a gravel management strategy, and there are no provisions within legislation that relates specifically to the preparation and decision-making on gravel management strategies. So we're relying on the general provisions in the Local Government Act to describe the engagement and decision-making processes for council. Those details will be further described if and when the strategy is presented to council with a recommendation for adoption. The LGA includes situations and thresholds where a more prescribed special consultative procedure is required. That was not required for this GMS review, so we're relying on the general principles of consultation in the LGA. We have engaged widely during the review of the GMS, often repeatedly using various engagement techniques. We have a large contact base of people we know to have an interest in gravel management, including Papa Te Purunanga, other government and non-government agencies, environmental and river care groups, and the extractors. In the latest round of engagement, the draft strategy was shared with around 500 email recipients requesting their feedback. To recap on the content of the GMS, you should have received drafts in January and March when we shared those with Runanga and the wider public. The purpose of the 2025 draft strategy is to guide the integration and sustainable management of river-based gravel extraction in Canterbury. Generally, the revised strategy is aligned with the 2012 version. The 2012 version was the catalyst for achieving a mixed model permission approach, which resulted in gravel authorisation process. It set the preference for limited volume and short duration permissions, and it addressed allocation issues at the time. All of these approaches have been carried over to the revised version. The 2012 version has principles and objectives that continue to fit within the outcomes and objectives sought in the revised strategy. Some feedback received is more relevant to the code of practice that directs the on-the-ground operations for how gravel extraction is planned and completed. The intention is to review that code of practice once we have a confirmed direction in our revised GMS. The revised strategy is formatted into 4 parts, the first 2 being background and scene setting information. Part 3 covers our 4 integrated outcomes, which each have objectives and committed actions to support the delivery of those outcomes, and Part 4 sets decision-making criteria. This describes the situations where gravel authorisations can be considered. On sharing the revised GMS for feedback, we had initially asked for written feedback within 3 weeks. A few requests were made for us to extend that deadline to allow respondents the opportunity to speak to their feedback. We extended that feedback period to 5 weeks, it was 23 working days, and invited those who did provide feedback to present to councillors. 8 respondents presented their feedback to you on the 8th of May. Some feedback raised concerns with the appropriateness of the relationship between the GMS and other RMA planning instruments and strategies. We have received legal advice from Laura Belby online from Russ Spear to ensure the interactions of the GMS with other statutory and non-statutory documents is legally appropriate. We can confirm that LGA can be used to establish strategies, and it's not uncommon for these types of non-statutory documents to be incorporated by reference into RMA planning instruments. In regards to how the GMS interacts with consenting requirements and decisions, the GMS is included as a condition of a permitted activity rule in the Land and Water Regional Plan relating to extraction by or on behalf of the Council. We use the gravel authorisation process as a way to manage how we allow others to meet this permitted activity by extracting on our behalf. Due to a policy in the Land and Water Regional Plan, resource consents being decided under the LWRP must have regard to the duration and volume limits within the GMS. All other resource consent decisions may, at the Council's discretion, have regard to the GMS as another matter. Similarly, the Council should have regard to the GMS when plan making under the RMA. We have now revised the wording in Part 4 to take a softer approach regarding RMA decision making. The updated language clarifies that the strategy sets the criteria for gravel authorisations and intends to inform consenting and plan-making decisions. It is recognised that having regard to the strategy is only one matter in those RMA decisions, and that decision-making under the RMA is not bound by the strategy. Concerns were also raised on the relationship of the 100-year strategy and the GMS. In response, we've removed most of the content that links these two documents. The revised strategy simply states now that the outcomes of the GMS are consistent with the outcomes of the 100-year strategy. In the draft shared wider for feedback, we included content based on mana whenua wording that reflected a hierarchy of obligations similar to that in the NPS freshwater management. This included as both an objective and a principle for decision making, and it recognised that it recognised the flood protection needs of people as a second order priority. However, during the wider feedback, we've received a request for its removal, particularly in light of recent government direction that council should not notify any freshwater planning instruments that give effect to the NPS FM, or this year. Based on this, staff have recommended the removal of that content from the GMS. Last slide. We received feedback from mana whenua throughout the process in both written and through hui and discussion. We heard a general support for gravel extraction where it is needed for flood protection, but also concerns around the impacts on and the needs of the river. We received mixed feedback on the recommended approach to carry over the short duration and limited volume permissions. Some support this approach, while others expressed concerns or frustration, mainly due to the cost of obtaining permissions and the need for certainty of supply. The short duration and limited volumes approach allow better flood management, more certainty around gravel availability and allocation, and help prevent long-term monopolisation of gravel sites. It is the staff's recommendation to keep with the short duration and limited volume approach. We have made some adjustments in response, including a shift for gravel authorisations to have a maximum duration of 18 months, and we have removed the upper volume cap for extraction from the Waimakariri River and the North Branch Hakateri River. These rivers have significant gravel supply rates and need for ongoing extraction to manage the flood risk. Durations of up to 5 years can be supported in those locations. The revised GMS is more supportive of gravel extraction that protects community infrastructure and the modest volumes typically needed by local farmers. This is achieved by opening up the gravel authorisation process for those reasons across all of Canterbury. Currently, gravel authorisations are focused within river rating districts. In response to the feedback, we've also recommended a clause that would allow the gravel authorisation process to be available as a tool in response to natural disasters. We've added 2 new objectives, one in response to DOC feedback on restoring and enhancing natural character, which fits well with the direction to support enhancement opportunities where they can be coupled with gravel extraction. The other came from district councils and contractor feedback to recognise the value of gravel resource to the community. There was some feedback that we thought was outside of the scope of the gravel management, such as inclusion of health and safety direction. There were also a number of minor changes in response to feedback or other minor improvements.
Just to recap next steps, so this afternoon we are going to send you a copy with all the revised changes as an additional bullet point as well. This copy is also going to all Papatipi Runanga this afternoon, and they will also have until the 20th of June to see if they have any final feedback before we prepare it for you for your July meeting. for recommended adoption. That's us, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Lee. Yep, Ian, and then Grant. And I'm sure Ian will want to comment, but maybe at the end. Do you want to go at the end, Ian? Yeah.
Kia ora kōrua. Yeah, I mean, we had I was lucky enough to go to the 3 hui that we had with Runaka, and also went to one of the gravel extractor hui in Timaru, and then just hearing a lot of the comments. So just on regards, so has this the draft hasn't in its full context hasn't gone to the Runaka yet, has it, or to the entities?
So they last received it before the they received a copy for consultation, and then post 8th May, where everyone came in and gave feedback. Staff have since made some changes. They haven't seen that copy yet, so that's what we're sending them this afternoon for transparency, so they can see, have final feedback before it does go before you in July.
And did they receive the code has the code been updated as well?
No, that'll get updated once this is adopted.
Because as we know, we heard through the some of the Runaka thing comments was, talking about gravel, because the consents will go through the entities still, and so they'll see those, but the gravel authorisation was kind of thing, and we discussed this, and Ian was there as well, we kind of thought have a higher level, and then having like annual hui at the start, and then kind of working out where the needs are. But I noticed that the gravel authorisations have been extended from 12 months to 18 months. So in a sense of having an annual hui, kind of working out where, I suppose in the Runaka's eyes of where things are happening, because, as one season, as we know, through flooding, it just can change like that. And so going from 12 months to 18 months, you kind of lose that annual focus. I know it probably makes it easier for the gravel extractors, but in a sense of thinking that the river changes all the time, and that kind of focus on how you're going to have an annual hui, but if you have an annual hui, but someone's got gravel extraction authorisation. So how flexible are the gravel authorisations to change and amend, etc.?
So we have full control over the gravel authorisation. So it's a permitted activity for ECAN to extract gravel, and we use the gravel authorisations to manage that process, so others can do that for us. Under our flood protection requirements, under our flood code of practice, which is separate to the gravel extraction code of practice, we're required to have annual hui with Papatipu Runanga who wish to annually. So we generally talk about gravel there. The gravel authorisations that are issued aren't calendar to calendar. They can apply for them any time. So they do stretch, they don't all have the same end date. What we're working towards in the code, I guess, is a more on-ground approach with Runanga, where depending on the rivers that they're most interested in or not, we could potentially get them involved on the ground before an authorisation is issued, and they have expressed some interest in being involved in compliance. And we are just this week interviewing for a dedicated compliance officer internally to support that. So I guess we're leaving flexibility in the code to engage with Runanga as they wish, depending what hour they're most interested in.
Thanks for that, Lee, and it's probably articulating that when you kind of go back out to with this draft, those kind of points. But also I'd like to acknowledge the kind of the upfront stuff you've put into the new the gravel management, and actually kind of articulate a lot of the things that people have asked for. So thank you for that. Kia ora.
Just to follow up to that, so the annual hui sort of provisions, is that in the code? Will that be in the code of practice? Is it pointed to in the actual gravel management strategy? That's a sort of process that happens with.
So Environment Canterbury has two permitted rules, particularly for flood operations. So one is for flood protection works, which covers about 70% of what we do, and one is for gravel. The requirement for the annual hui is for our flood program of works. So we meet annually to talk about what we've done in the last 12 months and what we do 12 months ahead. So for efficiency, because it's quite a bit of work to set those hui up, we also talk about gravel extraction there. So the two codes don't talk to each other, but it's effectively the same staff. So we cover the topics.
But I'm just saying, is that written down in the code or in the strategy? Just that talks about that will happen as a part of the...
It will be in the gravel code.
Cool. Thank you. Grant?
Thanks for that. Just a couple of queries from me. One of them's to do with the removal of the reference to the hierarchy of obligations, which I understand government direction about that. But what I wanted to know was how are the interests of the wider environment and this balance between water issues, how is that now going to be handled? And I'm talking about that in reference to the discussion we had yesterday on the RMA, possible submission on the RMA fresh water, and the discussion that we had there about dealing with the removal of the term of Te Mana O Te Wai. And there was I just wanted to be reassured that in the management of the gravel strategy, with that removal, that we will still be using the basis of the framework under the current MPS, which talks about the 6 key principles of water management. Will that happen? Will, even though you're referring the hierarchy is gone, but in terms of the overall assessment of impacts, if you like, that will still go on.
Yes, I believe so. One of the 4 integrated outcomes is the extent and natural character of braided rivers increases, and there are objectives and actions directly relevant to the extent of assessment that's expected, and then the level of protection that is expected as well. So it will be further described in the Code of Practice, but it is requiring, for instance, all gravel authorisations to have environmental assessments undertaken on them and any specific mitigations that are required applied. So I think it does strike a balance still. Yeah.
Just supplementary. That sort of answered my second question about how is natural character going to be handled, but you've just explained that. Does in terms of the code of conduct, you'll obviously develop something, but I presume that where that situation arises, that we would have as an organisation greater oversight and supervision of or monitoring of how that's carried out, and perhaps in conjunction with local runaka. Is that the sort of thing you've got in mind?
Yes, that's the intention. So there is a current code of practice, and we'll be looking to update it post this process to enhance those elements. And we are, resourcing up in the field and in the office to be able to do that a bit better, particularly for rivers where there is greater community and runaka interest.
Thanks, Grant. Just on that point about the hierarchy thing, because I think in our discussions yesterday, the majority of councillors supported the alternative option that Olivia put forward, which was to go back to the 2017 version of the MPS for freshwater, which still has Te Mana o Te Wai in it, and especially for planning purposes. And I know that, yes, we have to be cautious around what the government's done with Section 80 and that stuff, but I just think we need to make sure that that's consistent here and with what we sort of, not that we had a vote yesterday because we couldn't, but that guidance that was given yesterday is that we're mostly comfortable that that still remains as a concept. I just think however that's going to be worded in our submission to the minister or to the government should be consistent in here as well, because we're not there yet. And I don't want it to be like a reaction before we're there. So I just think, maybe think about that in light of what we discussed yesterday. I know that that's new to you maybe, but that's what was discussed yesterday. And I don't know how that's going to be worded because Olivia's and the team are obviously going to work on that, but I think that's really important that there's a consistency there. Yeah,
we can take that away and talk to Olivia. It won't be in the copy that you see this afternoon,
sure.
But we'll work on it behind the scenes.
I'll come to you last, Ian. Are you happy with that? Yeah. Claire?
Yeah, just following up on your point, I guess the focus for me, this is a gravel management strategy, and if the operation of it or following through on this involves water stuff, there is some quite strong RMA processes. So I think we just need to be aware of the cognizance of that. So it could well, from my understanding, I think it's probably pretty much covered in here. But happy to see what comes back.
Anyone else, or should we go? Where you go, Ian?
Look, I've got Lee to put up these two photographs. So this is the Orari River. This shows what it is that Lee's team is trying to do in practice. So, and it goes to the question about Te Mana Rotawai and the Maori of the river and the natural character. And it goes to efficiency for our ratepayers, and it goes to having a code of practice where the contractors who are doing the work understand what is required of them. So the photograph on the right is where a gravel authorisation has pretty much run its course. He's taken 30,000 cubic metres of shingle out of the river there on a GA, and the river is left free of weeds in a lovely braids, where the difference between the water depth and the top of the shingle banks is probably no more than half a metre anywhere across the river, and the braids were using the whole of the river to do it. The photograph on the left is where this contractor has applied for a GA, and I don't want to prejudge anything, but as I understand it, might be about to be applied. And what you note there is that a lot of exotic weeds, which is one of the issues, especially in our smaller rivers, which come into the fairway. So that costs the ratepayers money to spray. And you can see that the river is actually on the far side of the bank, and it's cutting in and eroding the far bank because there are islands covered in exotic weeds. Although they've been sprayed, you need a fresh to deal with that. Now, if he gets a GA to take shingle from that weedy stretch with islands, the river there will end up looking like the river on the right hand. And so this is, and with no cost to the ratepayer. And I guess, so this is, these to me, these photographs try to demonstrate what it is we're trying to achieve here, which is if you get a good synergy between a contractor who will leave the river in a great state and control it and take out the weeds. And it was noticeable and slightly poignant that as we drove onto the site on the left, a couple of wild cats went out of the riverbed, but you won't see a wild cat in the environment on the right-hand side because that's hostile to them, but very friendly to our nesting birds. And this contractor, perhaps 3 years ago, was resisting taking machinery out of it. He was a guy who has had an epiphany in terms of how he's going to operate now, and I think this is what we're trying to do. So just when you vote on this, just think about that.
Thanks, Ian. Any other comments, councillors? Grant?
Just one, the comment regarding the removed volume limit for the Waimakariri and Ashburton rivers. Are they being managed through consent or a general authorisation?
Yeah, currently on the Waimakariri, they have to be through resource consents because it's got its own regional plan. The Ashburton can have gravel authorisations, but under the recommended framework, those gravel authorisations would still be limited to 18 months. And if they wanted to go up to that 5-year duration, it would be through a resource consent process. Does that answer?
Yeah, and related to that, so in terms of the durations of up to 5 years, during that time frame, you'd be monitoring to ensure they're not taking out more than in terms of the baseline level is required for the river. That's something that you regularly assess on that.
Those rivers have such high supply rates that at the time of making the decision, we would have the confidence that the full volume applied for would be there for that 5-year duration.
Thank you. I think we've done our questions, and I appreciate Lee and team that you're sending an updated copy out, so we'll get that, and that'll go out to the Runanga, etc. as well. So good work, and I know you've got a little bit of work to do if you receive any feedback around that. So thank you, and of course what you've heard today. So thank you. Well done. So we've caught up. So that's great. Well done, people. And we've got Taflin and Trudy. I've got written down here, but oh no, yeah, Trudy. But I don't know if that's right. Oh, you can have a little stretch, councillors, in the meantime. So I know we've got a little briefing now about our outcomes reporting, so I'll hand over to the team and let you take it away. So thank you.
Great, kia ora team. Thanks for having us here. This morning I'd like to give you an update on our progress towards our outcomes reporting, which is due in September. As you know, we've worked with Council to develop our outcomes and outcome measures with a focus on what our core services are and ensuring that we deliver them effectively. Outcomes for each of the core services were workshopped with councillors in late 2023 and incorporated into the LTP in June 24. This year we've been working on designing and developing the methodologies to support ongoing reporting of the outcomes measures. Council have discussed and deliberated minor changes to the outcome measures as recommended by staff so that the outcomes are aligned with improved methodologies and national goals. So we now have the final suite of measures which will form the basis of our first report in September. We have a really clear plan to publish the outcomes outcome reporting in September and to tell our story of how our work is contributing to improved environmental, economic, cultural and social outcomes within Canterbury. I don't have the results for you today, but with the 2024-25 year ending in a few weeks, I can describe what we will have in September when the report is published. We have been following advice from the Officer of the Auditor General on outcomes reporting, and our contact has offered her support as we move towards publishing our first report in September. This style of outcomes reporting is a first for this council. We've always had community outcomes, but this is the first time we've defined the changes that we want to see backed up by data and metrics. We found it can be challenging to set the right measures and to meaningfully measure the impact of our actions. But we're learning as we go, and we're working hard to make sure that it's meaningful for our communities and scientifically accurate. We'll plan a program of improvement for future iterations. Outcomes reporting is not a statutory requirement, but it is good practice that council identify the outcomes, and now we have measures and targets and a commitment to report regularly, and all of this is set out within our impact framework. Our impact framework. Can I get a glass of water? Thank you. Our impact framework is the enduring, overarching structure that helps us to define, measure and communicate the difference our work is making for our environment and our communities. The framework helps us to focus our efforts for maximum positive outcomes for the environment and the community. It provides the clear link between what we do and the long-term change that we want to see, provides a way of measuring and reporting on our success, and it helps us to see how our work is contributing to the bigger picture. Specifically, the top white box there relating to the outcomes describes the 17 outcomes which we have for enduring changes we want for our environment and our communities, and then 25 outcome measures to measure the change in each outcome. Thank you. Here's some screenshots of the way that we're presenting our outcome measures in the annual plan. So each section will present the outcome measure, and the targets relevant to each core service. The outcomes and the measures are our commitment to the community, and any changes to these would need to be made by council through an annual plan or through a long-term plan process. We will not include additional details on the methodology underpinning each of the measures or the baseline or the comparator in the annual plan, and this gives us a little more flexibility to adjust our methodology pending or subject to changes if we need to. The additional detail on the methodology and the baselines will be described in full in the new outcome reporting web pages, which will go live in September. At this point, I just want to recap on our performance reporting elements. In blue, the performance year runs from the 1st of July to the 30th of June. And during the year, we provide quarterly updates on our progress achieving service measures and our financial performance, with the annual report as the dark blue diamond wrapping up the end of year results. Lower down the page in green, outcomes are much longer term, so we won't see rapid changes in outcome measures. We will provide an annual update. So therefore, we will provide an annual update on the progress of each outcome measure. Most outcome measures have an annual frequency, so they're measured annually within the financial year. So where possible, we're establishing a baseline or a comparator from the 23-24 year, so that is before the LTP came into effect, with the first result year being the 24-25 year, or the first year of the LTP this year. Due to the nature of these measures, there is some variability in the style and the frequency of the measurement there. So some outcome measures may be either reported on a rolling 10-year trend, reporting on a calendar year, or relying on external data sources, which are published every 5 to 10 years. So the most appropriate baseline or comparator, which was available relative to the 23-24 year, will be selected as the baseline or the comparator. Some outcome measures have a new methodology which has been established, and that method can't be applied retrospectively to produce an earlier result. So in that case, there are some outcome measures which will have a baseline year set this year in the 24-25 year. There are some baselines for the environmental analysis which are still being calculated. Analysis of the results has been done differently for the last 5 years, and scientists are working to reconcile the data and provide continuity. So results for the baseline year and for the 24-25 year will both be available in the first outcomes report in September. For many outcome measures, the data is collected over the financial year. So from the 1st of July, staff will be processing data to produce the results, and this will occur over July, August and September. We've prioritised the workflows for these results, but some processing will require external contractors and lab analysis to complete. We're confident that most of these results will be available in September when the web pages are published, but if there are any delays, the web pages will be updated as soon as possible once the results are confirmed. Also, every year there'll be a summary of the outcomes reporting included in the annual report, and this will report the information that's available on the outcome measures at the time of publishing the annual report. So in terms of our outcomes reporting, we're on track to publish our first round of reporting in September, and we'll have a comprehensive explanation of how our work is contributing towards progressing 22 of the outcome measures. That's 22 of the 25. So as discussed earlier, there have been some challenges in defining the most appropriate measures and methodologies, and as such, work is ongoing for 3 measures. The first one, E1, is a placeholder measure, which is contingent on co-design with Runanga. So following the Runanga reset, staff are preparing to work with Runanga to define the outcome and the measure, but this is not in place yet. The second one is the economic cost of flooding events to our community. This measure is very difficult to measure reliably. There are proxy measures from the Insurance Council of New Zealand, but we're unable to drill down to the Canterbury region. And as part of our outcomes reporting, we'll continue to provide updates on how our flood protection and river resilience work is protecting our communities, and we'll be considering some alternative metrics as part of this goal with the Council. The last one, the capacity and capability of civil defence emergency management in the region. There is an evaluation tool which is underway to assess the regional capability and capacity. There's a couple of territorial authorities which have been assessed by this tool currently, but we will not have a comprehensive data set available at the time of publishing this report. There's a national tool which has been forecast for the future as well, so that will inform what this measure is. But this is work in progress, and so we hope to have a more comprehensive result next year as our baseline year. We've provided a handout which describes some of the preliminary information on the methodologies and on the baseline of comparators for each outcome measure. We've provided this as supplementary information to the annual plan to give our communities an insight into how we're monitoring our outcome measures. This information is preliminary as work is still underway to produce the comprehensive reporting back pages, but we will publish this around the 19th of June, which is the same day that the annual plan will be available on the website for adoption, so communities will have access to the methodologies and the baseline information that we currently have. Moving on to the reporting back pages, they will go live in September, and they will include a more detailed explanation of what the measure means, how we're tracking towards our targets and the contributions that we're making to progress the outcome. Staff have been developing visually engaging and informative web pages to give users a view of how we're tracking and also dive into each of the outcome measures, learn more about the measure, why this is important, and where to find more information. We're making great progress on that, and we'll be able to give you a look at those web pages in August when they're further developed. Web-based reporting provides us with the flexibility to add updates as they become available and to add links and other relevant information that complements the set of measures that we've chosen. So the next step, as mentioned, staff will be working from this point forward over the next couple of months to be processing data to produce the year one results. We'll come back to Council in August with more information on those outcome measures, the final reporting back pages and the way that they're looking on the website as a draft in August. And we'll ensure that councillors are fully briefed on the full set of outcome measures and our inaugural results before it goes live in September. Our intention is to continue using the current set of outcome measures for the first few years of reporting, and as part of developing the next long-term plan for the 2027-37 period, we'll be able to draw on the first reports and feedback to review the outcomes and outcome measures. Any changes to the outcomes and outcome measures would be workshopped with councillors ahead of the next long-term plan. So
Kia ora, Trudy.
You take questions.
Thank you, and thanks, Carmen. I've got Ian, Dion. First of all, just look, I really love this diagram. I think it really helps us understand what we've done, and I know that all the work we've done together with staff over the last few years to get this in place. I'm really looking forward to the first report. Just a question. So I get that in terms of that slide, that's how it looks in the annual plan document showing people what we're doing. That's not the report though, is it? The report in September. Are we actually, so I understand that there'll be a web page and
Yep.
Are we actually going to, is there actually a report, like a hard copy report, or is it just straight up online and we'll get sent a link? Can you just explain that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So the intention behind the report is that it would be web pages. It would be a landing page that will help people navigate through the outcome measures. There'll be a page for each outcome measure that describes the baseline, the result for year one, and the explanation, further detail. So yeah, there's a web page for each outcome measure, and a summary of that would be published in the annual report. So that's the sort of the time-stamped where we're at.
So the summary in the annual report is probably the thing I was thinking about. And that summary, will it have some like graphs and stuff in it? Yeah, it will. Okay.
Yeah. We're intending.
Just thinking. No, it's good. That's good for me. I like that sort of stuff. But that's cool. No, it's really good. So September there'll be web pages that go live. We'll get told about that. That's great. And in the annual report around the similar time, that'll have a summary in it. Cool. And then links to the. Cool. Thank you, Ian, Dion, Vicky, and I'll keep holding your hands up and I'll write all that down.
So look, my question really, it's just about the nature of the reporting, and you've got on whatever outcomes reporting 2024-25, you just use you say that the economic cost of flooding or events in our community is not going to be reported on then, but that's and I'm not worried about that, but I guess the fact you talk about the economic cost of flooding events. Are you talking about the benefits in part of that reporting? Are you talking about the benefits we bring to communities and giving them a level of protection, which means that they can they can get insurance for their houses or assets? The economic benefit of actually being protected by, the economic benefit to Christchurch being protected, rather than just the damage floods do. If you get what I'm trying to say, because if the community is looking at our performance as a council and we're paying them rates to do this, they want to know whether those rates are actually doing, whether their rates are actually going towards benefiting. But if all we do is report on events which cost the community, then we're perhaps not quite getting the reporting right, if you get what I'm trying to say. And I don't need an immediate answer, but just if you could reflect on that and how you report on various things, that if we talk about the work we're doing, which actually is saving the money, even though we're taking rates from them. And and the only reason I mention this is because when I think we changed the rating we included some new suburbs in Ashburton a few years ago in the Ashburton River flood rating, and it meant that some people, even though their rates went up by, I think it was $8 a household, that was a 40% increase in their targeted rate. And they saw the 40%, And when they explained to them that it was $8, and for that they actually could buy insurance for their house, it was a communal insurance policy, effectively. That made them relax. So, if you understand what I'm trying to say here.
I think it's definitely something we need to consider. The thing that I'm thinking as you're describing that is a bit of a balance between our service measures and our outcome measures. And our service measures, they should be describing the benefit that communities are getting year upon year right now for their rates investment. The outcome measure, as I suggested, we've had some trouble with that, and we do need to reconsider what the most appropriate measure is that describes the long-term benefit that communities are getting for their rates investment. This hasn't been a great measure. I think the measure that we have, certainly looking at, as it indicated, we had a proxy from the Insurance Council of New Zealand, which was essentially a proxy for the weather events that had happened in that year. It was hard to infer the benefit of the flood protection schemes that we put in place. So we need to think about that in more detail. I don't think that's the right measure, and so we've got meetings coming up, and we'll certainly be coming back to the council. That's one where I think we haven't quite landed. We need to do some more work.
Really good response, and thanks, Ian. Dion?
I really, really like this. Thank you so much for pulling it together. I know measuring things is not very easy, but it really starts speaking to smart goals, but smart measurable things that we can do, which is really cool. And it starts to highlight some of the things that maybe we're not got very measurable, so we can actually communicate those to our communities a lot better. A lot of the stuff would be qualitative outcomes, which is fine, but how are we going to measure quantitative analysis or quantitative areas, so like feedback from communities, how people are feeling? And I know we do surveys, but can we at some stage blend that in so we're kind of getting quite a full picture rather than just hard data picture? Well, quantitative is hard data, but
I think it's a good question. I think we probably haven't. We focused this year on the more quantitative data, the environmental data sets. We've got a couple of surveys coming through, and we've just seen some of the feedback from the CDM community survey on how prepared folks are feeling around climate change and natural hazard risks. So that's exciting to see that. I think we can probably do some more work on the community surveys or on that sort of breadth of engagement and blending that in. But certainly to date, we've really focused on clearly measurable annual data set.
I think it's a great place to start, but yeah, the qualitative stuff will be very important as we start moving through. I think that's a good next step probably, but great work where you're at, and I look forward to seeing them.
Can I just add to that we have 3 surveys for our service measures, so 2 one's for public transport passenger satisfaction and one's for the total mobility customer satisfaction, and the other one on satisfaction with the biodiversity target rate and Y fund. So some of those surveys line up more with the service measure and the service in the year, but some of them may line up more with the long-term outcomes we're seeking. So we just need to balance the amount of surveys we do and the benefit we get from that, and if it aligns with a service measure better than maybe a longer-term outcome measure. So, yeah.
I think it is a really good point, to think about how we could mix those 2 data sets together in the reporting going forward. You could have little comment boxes or something that's on the relevant pages that say, hey, here's some other feedback we've received from the community that relates to this. Might not be exact, but it's just another way to show other perspectives. So something to think about. Not expected it this time, but something to think about. Vicky?
Yeah, there's a couple of comments really. So I'm really pleased to see this, and I'm liking the answers to the questions in that you're being really considered, and it's really important to be really considered in this. And there's a trade-off, isn't there, between data that you can access and that whole, perfection is the enemy of good, and how much effort you put into collecting that and so on. So I can, it's very tricky, and I think ultimately the really important thing is to land with some degree of confidence and then stick with it once you've got it, because if we start tweaking things and moving around, then you lose the benefit of having that consistency of data that you can track over time and see how we're moving. I just finally got around to deleting things out. We had to shrink the amount of stuff we had saved on our computers, and I just got around to that. And I found something that I put in against the very first annual plan that we were pulling together, my very first in 2019 when I was first elected, going into 2020. And I had a heap of questions about the levels of service because I couldn't see how they were actually telling us anything about how well we were getting things to change or getting things to run or anything. So it's just so heartening having seen that from all those years ago and see where we're at now. I feel like we're really on track to be able to track where we're going, and it just all fits together really neatly. So I'm really pleased to see this, and I look forward to seeing the first of the reports all coming together and how the web page looks. But I think it's really good work. So thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. Grant?
Thanks for the report. Yeah, I think it's really good. I was wondering what the relationship is between the work that Audit New Zealand are doing as part of the annual plan audit and how this fits into the annual plan. And are they having the opportunity to have a look, or will they want to have a look at this? Because the annual report, for them to sign it off, I think is going to be early October. So they're working on that now, and it's just, are they in the loop?
I think I'll try and answer that. So you first of all, you mentioned annual plan, but did you mean annual report? Yeah. Okay. The timeframes don't quite line up, as you've just said. So the timeframe for the annual report is the audit will only start, I believe, on the 18th of August. And that's expected to take about 5 weeks, but we're subject to the process audit goes through for that report. The actual outcome measures aren't auditable. They're not an auditable part of the annual report. So with the previous year's annual report, Audit New Zealand asked us to sort of quite clearly separate out the commentary in the annual report that's more context, that's not auditable, versus the auditable financial information and service measure information. So the outcome report part won't be auditable, but it will still be subject to the timelines of the annual report. So we will be going live with this outcomes reporting information in September, but the annual report process won't have been completed. The stage we're targeting to bring the annual report to the Audit Risk Committee on the 1st of October, I believe. So I think what you're saying, the timeframes aren't quite lining up, but it's not an auditable part of the annual report.
So the summary that we're just talking about will still go in the annual report, but it's like an appendix or a commentary to say this is what we're doing. That it's I suppose someone mentioned climate change, but the Auditor General or Audit New Zealand have a task to assess 2 or 3 items that the Auditor General wants them to comment on, and it may be that 1 or 2 of the items, like natural hazard management and climate change, how have we performed on those? But I suppose there might be a few that are needed to be assessed by Audit New Zealand.
Yes, certainly last year they did focus on climate change information in the annual report and provide some feedback against that. So I'm not aware if we've got that direction from them yet as to what those topics would be they want to investigate further. We know the service measures they're going to dive into more deeply. We know when they're starting the audit and the timeframe it normally takes, but we don't have a lot more information than that right now. But we will capture a summary of this outcomes reporting information in the annual report. They can provide feedback on it if they want to, but it's not technically the auditable part. So,
excuse me, if I can just add an extra point to that, just recognising it will be, you mentioned, would it be an appendix or added to it? We will have the most up-to-date version of the outcomes reporting that we've got within the annual report as part of the context, so it won't be tacked on. It'll be part of the body of the report, recognising the caveats that I've given, that we've got some processing requirements, so we'll provide as much as we can in that snapshot, and then on the website that will be updated. So whenever we look at the website, it'll be the most sort of up-to-date content. If there's lab results that come through in October, we'll put those up when we do, but the annual report will be as at August.
Did I have any other questions from councillors? David?
Thanks very much for the information. I'll just focusing perhaps on page 7, where you were talking about outcome reporting for 24-25 and the 3 measures that you weren't able to report on this year. Firstly, what sort of timeline do you envisage that this methodology may be completed? Obviously, I1 and K1 are quite a significant metric to this organisation. And I'm also sort of interested, what's the bracketed placeholder around Mahingakai? I'm probably getting a few questions rolled into one here. And will that metric sort of expand on Mahingakai sites and numbers participating in Mahingakai?
Great, thank you for those questions. I think that we can bundle them up. So we've got some plans in place for each one of those outcome measures. So the first one, the Mahingakai outcome measure, it is a placeholder because we've recognised that we want to have an outcome measure around Mahingakai. We have parked that outcome measure, we've parked the development of the methodology while we've been undertaking the Runanga reset. And so as that's progressing, and well progressed now, I understand, with work beginning on this outcome measure very soon, the purpose of that is that we want to co-design that. So we need to be able to design the measure and the baseline with Runanga, and then really make it live from that point. So my understanding is that we should be on track within the next year. So our baseline year would be next year. The 25-26 year would be the baseline year. The next one, the economic impact of flooding, we're struggling with the methodology for this one. So we really need to go back to the drawing board and have a look at all the information that's available to us at a regional level from a flood resilience and protection perspective. I think that we should be able to we'll be able to provide some context around the work that we're doing, but we're struggling to find a measurement. This one was beneficial that we had an economic measure in this. Economics don't feature very much in our outcome measures, and so this is valuable to have an economic value there. But the methodology and sort of the capability of the organisation to collect that information is quite limited. So we're looking at perhaps more a qualitative measurement there. I'm probably going into territory that I'm not well versed in, but we've got a working group lined up for this to get a better understanding of what that measure is, and I'm hopeful that we would have that in place by next year as well for 25-26. The final one that is well underway, as I said, there's 2 territorial authorities that have already participated in providing data towards that measure, but we won't have a complete data set this year. It's a new methodology, so the baseline would be from, well, now it'll be the 25-26 year, but we'll certainly have a result, have the baseline available for that in the 25-26 year.
Thanks, Trudy. Really good work. And I know they're not easy. And good question, David. Like, there's a lot of work, not all of them. We actually obviously put the idea out there, didn't we? And we said, yeah, that would be good, without knowing there's data sets and stuff. So now we have to work that out. So it's not bad out of 25 of them that there's 3 that have got some more work to do. So thank you. I think that's all the questions. Thanks, Trudy and Carmen. Looking forward to seeing this when it comes through, and congratulations on all the work behind the scenes to get the work done, and looking forward to seeing how it shapes down. So thank you.
Great. Thank you.
So that's lunchtime, councillors.
Yeah, Stuart and Giles to the table.
Good afternoon, councillors. Okay, so I will take it as read. So we've been sent out the PowerPoint slide pack. So that just covered a little bit of the background, the network land use changes that have happened since the introduction of the shuttle and then the removal through the earthquakes. A little bit there around the Christchurch City Council Annual Plan 25-26, which kind of centres on this discussion. Provided some background and overview of the new legislative requirements following the amendment of the Act, a bit around the strategic alignment, and essentially what we're here to discuss is our response to Christchurch City Council. So really, as I say, I've taken the pack as read, so happy to take any kind of questions, feedback, any points of clarification before we get into the discussion.
Would you prefer us to go through the slides?
Sorry, I'm just kind of in a mind blank. All right, so do we have any... I mean, I feel like maybe I should address this a little bit because I did kind of make the submission. And I obviously have been approached by their councillors about it because they have this nostalgia about it and they're not necessarily using our wonderful 1,800 buses that move through the CBD every day, so they're not aware that there is already a solution in place. It's just not free and it's just not a yellow shuttle. Yeah, I think my approach was I've, of course, outlined that we, as a public transport authority, have scepticism over it. We don't see that there is a problem definition that needs to be solved, and the shuttle might not be the solution. But I did say there seems to be quite a political drive for this business case, for the return of this service, and the ball is in our court as to whether we really... our position on it, because ultimately we can say it won't be exempt from public transport, being a public transport service. So let's see if we've got any questions from the floor. Claire?
Can I just seek clarity? You just talked about you giving your a submission as you, but it was you presented on behalf of the council, wasn't it?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And that was to their annual plan?
It was, yeah. And I outlined the points in our annual plan submission which said we weren't supportive. John?
Right, so just given my work with Ashburton and now starting to understand this stuff, so it would require a contract, it would require some consultation and then a targeted rate, would it, to enable it? And then the fare box recovery and a whole bunch of things. How does that play into it? I've read the documents, but I just...
Yep, so through you, Mr. Chair. So essentially what we're discussing here and what Christchurch City Council are looking for some feedback on is, does Environment Canterbury Council support a proposal to review the Central City Shuttle? So we don't know exactly what that model would look like. We assume it would need some level of subsidy, in which case it would need to be contracted through Environment Canterbury. But this is really to do that kind of initial investigation, to clarify the problem statement and to kind of look and consider the next steps. So there's still a lot more information that would be needed following this process. If it was to be a subsidised service, it would need to go through all the checks and balances that any other bus service would need to go through.
Thanks. I mean, it clarifies it, but in my mind, okay, do you progress with something that would require X if we then said yes, and is X achievable? That's, I guess, the thinking of, do we progress or not? That's the piece for me.
Councillor Southworth.
So, firstly, just to check, this isn't a discussion about whether we would take it on and do it, is it? This is about City Council pursuing this and us providing some advice at this stage as to which way we might go in terms of...
Yeah, so sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, for clarification. So they're seeking advice around if Environment Canterbury Council supports a proposal to review the Central City Shuttle, which is quite hard to say. After that, what we'd need to look at then is what that model would look like. If it had any level of subsidy, it would need to be contracted through an Environment Canterbury contract. As the PTA, the legislation means that we would need to hold that contract because it's got a subsidy. It would be an integral service, and obviously we would need to look at and evaluate how that fits into our existing services within the central city. Just as a quick clarification as well, when we talk about how many services we have in the central city, it's just over 12,000. So apologies, I know that 1,200. Did I say 12,000? That's amazing. PT Futures already. 1,200. Rather than the 1,800 that we talked about in the submission. So you'll see there it talks to how many peak trips we have and how many off-peak trips. So that, in terms of the central city, we do see that it's very, very well serviced. One of the challenges we have at the moment is that maybe people don't know how to use the service, they may not know about the daily capping. So if you use the bus twice a day, the rest of your travel is free. So you can kind of merrily go around and using all your 1,200 scheduled bus services for free, essentially, once you've paid those two fares. And so we're going to do a marketing campaign as well, where we're going to try and help people be able to navigate around the central city. Through the regional public transport plan as well, there was talk of a review, and this was through the Greater Christchurch Partnership, the potential to review a central city zone once we've got a national ticketing solution in place. Obviously, that's not something we can confirm yet, but it's something that we could potentially consider in the future.
So in terms of the word subsidy there, and just for the city councillors who may be watching, the public who may be watching, what would the process be if they decided they wanted to fully fund it?
So it would still count as a subsidy. So essentially, we would still need to contract it, but any subsidised service becomes an integral service. It's still subsidised by ratepayers and taxpayers. So it would also count as part of our private revenue ratio as well. So if there's any level of subsidy applied to public transport, that applies to the private revenue ratio.
Grant. Oh, sorry, Vicky, question 2. Supplementary.
So I don't mind if others want to go further. I just wanted you to know that I hadn't finished my line of questioning before it went off and on. Okay, so do we have? I don't think I've seen in this pack. There's not like us overlaid like the old route. I don't know if there. I know there's been a lot of change in the city since the old shuttles. So whether they're still thinking of following the same route or not as before, I don't know. But it'd be helpful to see what perhaps happened before, or if they've already got a preliminary idea of what route they're looking at. Nope, that's all right. So that would be interesting to know. And I do use public transport a lot, and whilst I acknowledge that we have all these routes and you can see them all in there, in order to get from some A's to B's, you have to go back through the interchange and come back round and out. So it actually takes quite a long time. Now I'm a fast walker, but for people who aren't, moving between some of those places that you might want to go, if you were going to use the bus, could take a long time, particularly if some of these routes are on, like a 20-minute frequency, and then you've got others that are on the 10, and then you've got to tie in with when one comes into the interchange, you land there, and then you've got to switch out and go on to another. Like, it can take a really surprisingly long time, and if you can walk fast and mobile, you just bypass the interchange part and go to the nearest stop. But that might be, it could be 500 yards away, which isn't a big deal for me, but it is for others. And the other thing, that was the other question I was going to ask, is around the times that it runs. Because, so for example, I quite often go to the WEA, which is over near the art gallery. And in the evenings, it can feel a little bit sketchy walking around some of those areas. And certainly some of the older people that go there talk about the fact that they're heading into the interchange to get, and you're walking again quite distant. The weather's bad, etc., etc. It's not as user friendly as it could be. So I think there are some gaps in and it's not as convenient and easy. I love our bus service. I don't want to do it down at all, but I can see why, if you're trying to move around in the city centre, if you wanted people to sort of give up on their car even, I think something that links up more of those useful parts of the city in an easy to get around way could offer some benefits from my own personal experience, trying to use the buses as much as I possibly can. That's my sense of where things are. But the things that would be interesting to me, but I think, tell me if I'm wrong here, but I don't think you actually know yet, is it's perhaps what would come out of doing some investigating and going out and talking to the public, would be what's the route and what are the times? Is this going to be running into the evenings and you can get from somewhere and into the interchange without having to walk around in dark parts of the city, for example? So it's sort of, that's the important part for me.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, so essentially this is looking to clarify that. So we don't have the details around what the route would look like, what the fares would look like, what the timing would be. This proposal is to do some of that preliminary work to kind of look at what's the potential for that, what might the route look like, what's the use cases, who would be wanting to utilise a central city shuttle. It's a risky thing to say, trust me. So, like the potential of what that could look like. So that's what Christchurch City Council are looking at, and that's what they've gone out within their annual plan around an investigation to kind of look at, is it even a viable idea? Is this kind of something that would work? What are the gaps in our network? Who would utilise this kind of service? What are they using it for? And then that would kind of flow into what we're suggesting here into our rest of network business case, because then we can kind of actually look at where are some of the gaps and what are some of the options and opportunities.
Really final point to that, if they go down that route, I would really, really like to see some analysis done based on gender, particularly if you're looking at later time options and things like that. Like, I think it would be great to see the different, and if there are differences in age groups and gender.
Oh, yeah.
So sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, just really quickly. So they have been out to consult as we have done on our annual plan. So if I just quickly run you through high level what the feedback has come back. So they received 477 submissions. So again, this is allocating up to 200,000 for a scoping study for a central city shuttle service. 58% supported the proposal and 42% opposed it. So the things kind of, like some of the things around the positives were the fond memories of the shuttle service. We've got the photo up there. I think a lot of people remember the yellow bus going round, and it was free at the time. Improved accessibility within central city, easier for residents and visitors to get around. Increased foot traffic in the central city would be good for businesses. And then you've got some kind of versus some commentary around unnecessary given the existing public transport options, concerns around utilisation and potential for more pressing priorities. So it's just useful to have that context as well from the community.
All right, I've got questions from Edge, Pauling, Swiggs and Mackay, and then we're going to try and get a steer here to staff regarding that final question. So, Councillor Edge, please.
Just from me, I was involved in the initial meeting in July 2022 with the Mayor, Leanne Daziel, and Chair Huey, and I think Stuart was online as part of that discussion as well. And the upshot of that was that, there was some idea that we would develop a joint scoping exercise, but then subsequent to that, a fairly thorough report came to the council at its Air Quality Transport Urban Development meeting in September 2022. And that was explaining the pros and cons of this idea, so it's not a new idea. And I have a feeling that it was, and I couldn't find the decision of that at the subsequent meeting, which would have been early 2023. But one of the issues was not taking any further action or put it on to the incoming committee, which I don't think we did. But it seemed to me that in the background information that was provided as part of that report, and even to some extent to the things that you're saying here, that things probably really haven't changed. But and there is a map within that report showing where the route was, basically going from Kilmore Street, I think, down to Morehouse Ave and to a bit of a loop up Colombo Street. But one of the things that the report says is that the conclusions of that early assessment was that a central city shuttle service would duplicate and overlap with existing and planned public transport services and infrastructure. And am I right in that situation hasn't changed?
That's correct. So when the Central City Shuttle used to exist, the network looked very, very different. Obviously, we've had the earthquakes, we've had big transformational change within the city. You'll see that we've put the map up in this pack, which shows the fact that the city is already covered by the existing services. So yes, that's the situation that we're in at the moment. It's not something that was brought through PT Futures. But as I say, if there is a problem identified in terms of through another scoping study, we would bring that into the rest of network review.
Just to follow up on that, and the staff noted that a free Central City shuttle service was unlikely to attract central government funding for capital investment or operational support, and would therefore be fully ratepayer funded. And there was no existing budgets at the time to take a feasibility report. One of the main issues was that our staff had a lot of work on, and I think it still has a lot of work on, and therefore some reprioritisation was going to be needed at the time. But yeah, so it didn't proceed, and I think the things that in my mind have changed since that time is the latest issue around fare recovery, and that would even be, I mean, the idea of the Central City Shuttle was that it was funded at the time by the Christchurch business community as a way of transporting people from key, that's tourists and locals, into the central city from where accommodation, near where accommodation they could connect up to.
Great, thank you, Grant. It's been 5 minutes, and I'll note that down as a negative. So you're not supporting any further scoping?
No.
Councillor Swiggs.
Okay, who would pay this scoping exercise?
So Christchurch City Council are proposing they rate to pay for this scoping exercise. So what they're seeking is, so we're not seeking Environment Canterbury Council to support what happens after that scoping exercise. Essentially what they're looking for is, do you support them putting the money into undertaking the scoping exercise?
And then that wouldn't tie up any of our staff and the other work that we've got to do, because we're asking a lot of our staff for our rest of network work. So if we said, fine, go ahead, do what you want to do, that's not going to have any impact on your work programs at this point in time?
Through you, Mr. Chair, minimal impacts. We do have the opportunity to provide some input into the scoping study, which would be a useful thing for us to do, because obviously we will get the outputs of that scoping study, and it would probably fall onto ECAN to follow what the next steps may be. And as we've said, we would include it. The logical step would seem to be included in the rest of network review. So it makes sense for us to look at making sure that we get the information we need up front. So it's a really good opportunity for us to work together.
Chair Pauling.
Kia ora koutou. Yeah, I think where I'm sitting is, I think we've given pretty clear feedback to the City Council through the submission process, and of course, as the background that Grant outlined, there's some pretty good background there. And there's a lot of assumptions in the, what they want to do. I mean, I note in our slide pack here about, if the City Council's investigation was to define a clear problem, that could be helpful, So I think it's a bit tough for us to, make a decision for City Council. Like, they've gone out to do the consultation, they've come up with the project, they've heard the submissions, we haven't. I mean, ultimately they need to make the call that they need to make. But like Dion, like, those questions are helpful. Does that have an impact on us? Probably not. And ultimately it would come back to us after that to make a final decision, and then you could weigh it up properly. I think it's hard to weigh up right now. But I think we've got to keep giving the same clear feedback that there's potential duplication issues. It would have to come back to us. But at the end of the day, CCC, if you want to do the investigation and use your ratepayer money to do that, then that's what they need to face at their annual plan deliberations or at the time. But we've given the clear feedback, and I think that should remain. That feedback should be the same. But at the end of the day, it's up to them at the moment. But it'll ultimately be up to us at some point in the future. Beach way there, Chair, but you know what I mean?
Clear.
Yeah, look, do we support them putting dollars in? It's a governance decision. I'm a little bit in Councillor Chair Pauling's space. It's their governance table that has got to justify that to their ratepayers. It could be a piece of work that may have some value to us in the future, or it may not. I think that for me, it's around that messaging. It suggests in our briefing papers that their staff have briefed the council. I'm presuming that we may have been part of providing some of that information. Hopefully we were, so that the correct information was provided. But yeah, I'm a bit like making sure that our position statement or that the impacts on it are well and truly clear to that council to inform them in their decision making.
That's clear, John.
Yep, I will support. It is their governance decision ultimately, but I would just like us to really clarify fare box recovery contract, all the implications, and just be very clear that just because they come back with a business case or proposal, it may not be achievable within the space. So, fair decision, but yeah, let's be just really clear about all those implications that then flow on in a decision making process.
All right, because we've come around here, we'll just wrap around this way. So I actually support it because I think it's come from the elected members, the scoping study that is. It's come from elected members. There's good support through their public annual plan submissions, and it's more study into PT, and so the scoping exercise may come out how we may imagine it to. But I agree with Craig, probably erring on the side of if that's the will of the city council, then that's their will. So, rather than us vetoing it at this point. Yeah.
Hey, Pate Taku, just a question regarding, have they put a proposed route for it, or is it just that's going to be part of the proposed, because knowing that Colombo Street now is like all walkways and cycleways and kind of there's no bus stops anywhere, and as you said, Manchester Street is our kind of thoroughfare now. It's kind of out of the city itself. Be interested. That's what I suppose the scoping study is going to look at. Yeah, I mean, just rereading our submission to their proposal, as Chair Pauling's already mentioned, especially that last paragraph, if they do choose to go ahead, scope and report of Central City Services, we recommend they work with NCTA kind of thing. So, I mean, it's up to them. I'm a bit like, that two bob kind of thing. If they want to run with it, and then we'll just see what it comes out. But, if it's they're paying for it, and it's minimal impact on us. Okay, to buy.
Yep, happy to support the city in investigating. As I've said already, I think there are some gaps when you start actually understanding how you link between places. Thank you.
Genevieve.
Same with myself. A lot of people have come forward and discussed this type of thing that is actually missing in the city since the removal of the pass shuttle. Although it's a different service, it's similar. I think the city should scope it and cost it effectively. But yeah, good idea, and yeah.
Another bite of the apple there, Grant.
Look, I'm not really supporting it because I think the work has been done in the past in terms of duplication. Since the 2022, we've had a sign-off from all parties in the Greater Christchurch Partnership of the spatial plan, which is gearing up towards the MRT. And there was a concern that if we start to duplicate the way that people are moving through the city, does that affect the potential viability of the MRT project? But also the sheer number of, in this report, the sheer number of buses and stuff that are coming through that central city at the moment anyway. Look, if the idea was a free service, so I mean that discussion, if it has to be held with NZT, I don't think they're going to wear it. In which case, the people of Christchurch will have to just fund it themselves. presumably. But yeah, so look, I don't support. I think it'd be a waste of time myself.
David.
Yeah, always be a bit difficult being the tail end Charlie of the conversation where a lot's been said and I don't really have a lot more to add. But having said that, look, I'm probably of the mind that if the city want to pursue the investigation, that's fine, that's their prerogative. But I do support the notion that we clearly outline our position on a number of factors going forward, and just because a business case comes back and may think it's a great idea, who foots the bill, and if they want to pay for it ultimately, we'll obviously have to contract. If they want to pay us to do the job, well, that may be the outcome. But in the interim, look, if they want to commission a survey and business case on it, I'm comfortable with that. But I'm a bit nervous going forward as to the implications to us, both from a staff time and financial implications to this organisation. Yeah, I'm pretty nervous about that going forward.
Cool. So to summarise, yep, Craig. Dion.
Yeah, because I only asked questions before. I'm actually probably not very supportive, to be fair. If I put my old hat on, I represented that central city, and I know those communities who have been asking for this. We've got some issues around the Victoria neighbourhood where there's a little bit of accessibility issue, and the West End area. And it's been known for a very long time, and those areas are growing in terms of the population. But what I know is that when they do this little case thingy, it's going to come in and the answer's we already know what the answer effectively is. We've got to do a rested network business case to understand the whole network. We've got communities elsewhere in the city crying out for services where we've got growth areas. We can't do it all. Now, why I'm erring on the saying I don't really support them doing it is because it will set an expectation of those communities that we will deliver something, and then we're the bad guys. So I'm not really willing for that to happen, to be fair. But it sounds like there's probably more support, but I just needed to say that because they will, once it gets done, they land a business case, there will be an expectation that we do it.
Yes, Sonia.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, just to clarify, they're not planning to do a full business case process. It's just a kind of initial scoping and investigation. But I take your point, definitely, that there always is that risk when you go out to consult with the community that we raise their expectations that it will result in a new service or change.
Craig, quickly.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, I was going to mention earlier on the rest of network business case review. But I think that is really important in the context. So again, I think that's got to be part of our feedback. But it sort of does, from our deliberations on our annual plan and obviously some of the issues that we do know about in Selwyn and others, it's an interesting case study, isn't it, about how a district council could do something and even help us in understanding stuff and using their own district rates to look at different types of services, because I think that is an interesting space. We did raise that at our deliberations. We did put some money towards those sorts of things. So I just think that's interesting in the perspective of this, and the rest of network business review. Network review is the one that we really need to focus on. And just the other thing as part of our feedback would be, a bit like Grant said, that obviously we've been focusing on other critical needs, and as Dion's just brought up. So like I said before, it's ultimately their decision. They need to make the call, but I think we've got to give that strong and clear message that we already have given and back that up with the stuff that Grant's raised about the previous work, etc. together. But that's their decision. Yeah.
Clear, last one.
So, yeah, just the context I think really is important, and I think it is around, you could bring the winner up a raise there by Councillor Swiggs of raising expectations. If it went on further and they'd put public funding in, would that impact the PPR? It would. Yeah. So that's a bit of that's a real worry. But at a higher level from a governance perspective, I still think it's their decision.
So sorry, through you, Mr. Chair, just to clarify, so any public transport service that requires a subsidy, be that a taxpayer, be that a local ratepayer, will mean that it's counted as part of that private revenue ratio. So even if it was to be 100% funded through, let's say we could do it through Christchurch City Council, but we have to contract it, that would still count as private revenue.
But would they back count it? Would they then go back and look at that initial funding for the scoping exercise, for example? No.
Sorry, is the question, just to clarify, would they consider how much it costs to do the investigation, or?
Yes. So if it proceeded and it landed in our transport model, or actual, would they actually then go back and look at that initial early investigation stuff or not? No.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can't say for certain, but I don't see that they would, and it would be such a small portion in terms of the funding. So.
Okay, so to summarise, I think that there is the mood of the room to endorse the scoping study, to remain neutral on the broader idea of the shuttle. Is that, of course, there's negativity in the room, but on the whole, there was support there was an endorsement for the scoping. Yeah.
But in the end, it's their decision, right? So it doesn't matter what we say.
Well, yeah. Well, the question is here, but so is it clear for you guys what we've come away with?
So through you, Mr. Chair, so we do have Christchurch City Council obviously listening in at the back process. Would you like us to respond, or I guess we're throwing it out there in the potential for elected members to have a conversation with Christchurch City Council counterparts?
I'm happy to pick it up. Craig too.
I mean, I think we should write something up for sure, and maybe between myself and Dion and Joe, we can get that across to City Council. Yeah. But I've heard the feedback, so but we should just follow it up with something here.
Great. So thank you, Sonia, Stuart, and Giles, for your time, and thank you for what you do for us.
Yeah, I agree. I think having letter from staff and explaining those bigger picture things about